Do you find yourself doing the same tasks over and over again in Excel? Generating summaries, formatting reports, copying data? Well, what if I told you Excel could do all of that for you with the click of a button? Welcome to your beginner-friendly introduction to VBA, the powerful automation language built right into Excel. At the end of this video, you'll not only understand VBA, but you'll have the tools and best practice to write your own clean, effective, and professional VBA code. So what exactly is VBA? VBA stands for Visual Basics Applications. It's a programming language and it lets Excel go beyond the means of its traditional functions or formulas. This allows you to automate boring and repetitive tasks. You might be thinking that you can do this sort of thing with the likes of Power Query, but when you're dealing with complex or repetitive processes and you want to package these up nicely into a single click button, then VBA might be the solution for you. Let's get started with your first macro. Within Excel, if you've not used macros before, you might not see the developer ribbon here. If that's the case, then you need to right click anywhere on the ribbon, customize the ribbon, and on the right hand side in this customize the ribbon section, make sure you've got a tick next to the developer. Click OK when you've got the tick and you'll see the developer ribbon appear. And to get into Visual Basics, you can click the button here, or you can press the keyboard shortcut Alt and F11. That's going to pull up Visual Basics. I'm just going to close these windows. So as a brief overview of the Visual Basics window, at the top left hand side here we have the Project Explorer window. On the bottom left hand side we have the Properties window. At the bottom on the right I've got my Immediate window, and then at the top right we have our Code window. Along the top we've got a menu bar, and underneath the menu bar we have our toolbar. So let's look at writing our first macro. In our Project Explorer, on the left hand side in the Project Explorer we're going to navigate to this current workbook that I'm in. So this is here, and within that we have Microsoft Excel objects, and we're going to house our code within a module. At the moment you can't see any modules within the Project Explorer for this workbook. So we're just going to right click and we're going to click Insert Module. You can now see we've got a modules folder within the workbook, and it's generated a module called Module 1 for us. We can rename that module on the left hand side by typing in here. So I'm just going to type example module. You can now see that that's been renamed. And then on the right hand side, if we click on this example module, here we have our code window for that module. I'm just going to expand this out. So when we want to start a macro, we can type in sub, which stands for subroutine, and then we need to give the macro a name. So we can call this example, and then we'll open parenthesis and close parenthesis. We can press enter to go down to the next line, and you can see that's automatically added in the end subroutine. So now all of our code for this subroutine needs to go between the sub and its name and the end sub. So I'm just going to enter some lines here. So for a nice simple example, we're going to use a message box. So the code for that is just message box. And then you can see the syntax has popped up here. So we're going to open parenthesis. Our prompt is going to be within speech marks. And then all these following arguments, exactly the same as Excel, they're in square brackets, which tells us that they're optional arguments. So I'm just going to close brackets on that, and I'm going to click close on the VBA window. So now we're within Excel. How can we access that macro that we've just written? We can go to the Developer tab, and we can go to Macros, or Alt and F8 is the keyboard shortcut. This is going to bring up our macro window. Now you can see the macro we've just wrote called example is here. So we can click run, and that will run the macro. And now we've got our pop-up. So this is our message box that we've just wrote. So hello viewers, have you hit the subscribe button? We can click OK. Another way that we can run that macro is we can assign it to a button. So we could go to the Insert tab, we could go to Shapes, Text Box. We could just draw a text box here. We could call this Run Message Box Macro. Then when we right click on that box, we can go to Assign Macro, click Example, Okay, now you can see when we hover over that text box, we get the little hand symbol. So if we click that, and again, that's prompted us for our macro. When writing your subroutines, it's good practice to set variables and define what those variable data types are and what the variables relate to. So let's have a look at an example of that. We're going to start off a new subroutine by typing sub and then a name. I'm going to call this example 2, open parenthesis, close parenthesis, press enter. Now, our first line of code, we're going to use dim. So dim means to declare a variable. We can call this variable anything we like. So I'm going to call this variable example. And then we need to declare the data type for that variable. So we're going to put as, and this is just going to be a text string. So for that, we can type in string. You can see the ItaliCsense has prompted me for string. So I can just press the tab key to commit that. Now we need to tell the code what that variable example will equal. So we would type the name of the variable, and then we would put equals. And then because I want it to be text, we need to put that in double quotes. And I'm just going to put Ben's example. I'm going to close the double quotes, and then we're going to press enter. Just going to correct the typing mistake there. Now we need to do something with that string. We could output that variable into Excel by telling the code where we want to put it. So we could declare a range, open parenthesis. You can see this is asking for cells. So we could put in double quotes A16, close double quotes, and then close parenthesis. And then if we put full stop, now the options here, we want to put the value. So we're going to go down to value using the arrow keys, press the tab button, and then we'd say equals, and then we could put variable example, which we've defined as a string type above, and the contents of that variable example will be the text Ben example. So now we can close that window, and if we go to the developer tab, we'll press Alt and F8 to go back into macros. We've now got example 2. If we click run, you can see that's now populated our variable text straight into the cell we've defined. If we go back into Visual Basics, pressing Alt and F11, this is a really simple example here, but as things get more complicated, you're going to be wanting to debug your code as you're stepping through it. So a way to do that is we could put below here debug.print and type our variable name. So now if we were to run that code, I'm not going to go back into Excel and do the same way we've just run it. Another alternative method is we can press the play button here when we're clicked into the right subroutine. So careful where we've got 2 subroutines. If we were clicking here and pressing play, we'd run that one. So we're going to click here, press play, and now you can see down here in the immediate window, I've got a printout of exactly what that variable example contents is. If you don't see this immediate window, you can go to View and Immediate Window, or press Ctrl and G, and then that will appear. And if you've got lots of debug going on, you might want to clear the outputs in there, so you can just press Ctrl and A, or highlight any specific values you want to remove and press the delete key to clear your immediate window. This is a quick way of debugging your code as you step through it. An alternative method to play in your macro, instead of clearing up here and clicking your play button, as you can see the shortcut is F5. So if we just press F5, that's going to run for us again. Or alternatively, I'm just going to make this window smaller so that we can see it alongside Excel. I'm going to delete the example. We're going to click into the subroutine, and this time we're going to use F8. What F8 allows us to do is it allows us to step through our code line by line, which is really useful when you're debugging elements. So if we press F8, you can see it's highlighted our first row, which means that's the row of code it's currently executing. If we press F8 again, it's going to step to the next row. And then if we press F8 again, it's next to the next row. I'm just going to clear the immediate window so that we know that that's running. If we press F8 again, we should see the output of that debug. And you can see it there. And then if we press F8 again, we should see this line of code execute, which is going to put the contents of the variable called variable example into this cell. And there it is. Also, another way, when you're running the code line by line like this, we've added a debug print to see the variable example output in the immediate window. An alternative method, if you've not got many things you want to debug, is you could just hover over, and then you can see when I hover over the variable example, because that's been stored in memory, because we've run this code, you can see the actual result is shown there. And again, if I was to hover over this range A16, you can see Ben's example as being shown as the output there. In this example where we've chosen to use cell A16 as our destination, this is a range. However, Excel is made up of objects. These objects can be the workbook, the worksheets within the workbook, the ranges of cells within the worksheets, and then objects within those worksheets, such as tables, pivot tables, shapes. To illustrate workbooks and worksheets, we can set up another example subroutine. I'm going to call this one example 3. And then we're going to dim WB as workbook, and we're going to dim WS as worksheet. These are common shorthand for workbook and worksheet references. To make writing our code quicker, we can refer to WB and WS later on. First, we need to set what those objects relate to. So we're going to set WB equal to this workbook, and we're going to set WS equal to active sheet. Now, if we were to see the output of these using debug print WB, I'm just going to call upon, because this is an object, we need to declare what we want to retrieve from that object. So I'm going to retrieve the name of WB, just so we can see what that's doing. And within debug.print for WS, I'm going to retrieve the name as well. So now I'm just going to clear the immediate window where I've been testing. If we press F5 now, you can see that the debug print for the workbook name has retrieved the Excel workbook's name, including the file type, and then the worksheet, active sheet, is called VBA. And if we go back into the workbook, you can see the sheet is called VBA and the title is indeed that. There is the option within VBA to record a macro, so instead of writing our own code like we have been here, we can just click on the record button, give the macro a name. This is similar to how we were doing after the sub. So we're going to call this example for recorded. We're going to store that within this workbook. So this macro, once it's recorded, will only be available in this workbook. If we wanted this macro to be available in every workbook, then we'd use the personal macro workbook. I've done a demonstration of this in another video where I've recorded macros for both the quick access toolbar and the ribbon. So if you're unsure on how to do that, then please watch those. So we'll go in this workbook. You can assign a shortcut key. This will override any built-in shortcuts to Excel. So for example, if you pressed C here, you would no longer be able to do Control-C for copy. It would execute this macro instead. So just be mindful if you're using those. You can give it a description. I'm not going to bother here. And we can click OK. So now from this point onwards, you can see down the bottom left here, we have the symbol showing it's recording, and we can stop. And again, likewise up here, we have the stop recording function. I'm just going to do some basic formatting on this table, where I'm going to select the headers. I'm going to go to home and bold. I'm going to select these dates here and convert them to a date format. And then I'm just going to apply some grid lines over the data. I'm going to click stop. Now if we open up the Visual Basic Editor by pressing Alt and F11, and if we go to our new module here called Module 1, you can see this has our example for recorded macro subroutine. However, you can see there's a lot of code here for those 3 simple actions where we simply made the titles bold, added grid lines, and also converted the first column to dates. If you're going to use the record macro function to generate your Visual Basics code, then it's good practice to clean this up as much as possible, because there'll be a lot of redundant code that's not actually required. So let's have a look how we can clean this up so it's a nice 3-step process of executing those actions. At the top here you can see it's said to select range A3 to F3 and use the select function. It's bad practice to be selecting cells within Excel. We should navigate to these dynamically in the code. So to avoid this step, we could say with this range, and then we're going to take the syntax from our selection here. So instead of selecting and then using selection, we're just going to declare the range. We're going to type font.bold and then equals true. So now if we want to test this line of code, we can press F8 to start the module, and then F8 again to execute this one line. And now you can see we've got, with just that one line of code, we've got the bold. Up here you might have noticed there's some green text with single quotes in front of it. Anything with a single quote in front is commented code. And this is just to articulate what you're doing in your code, but the contents of that text isn't actually part of your code. So we could put here, change headers to bold, and this will go green, indicating it's just comments to help us understand what we've done in the future, and it's telling us what the line of code below will do. So we're going to move on. Our next step was to change the first column to dates, so we could put change first column to date format, and then we can see again it's used a selection method, so we want to avoid that. So we're just going to take the range, and then we're going to take the number formatting arguments, we're going to paste that in there, and finally we're going to do the grid lines. So apply grid lines to the range. So if we look further down our code, here's where the grid line section started. Below you can see that it's actually added an edge left border, an edge top, an edge bottom, right, vertical, horizontal. So it's gone around the whole perimeter of the cells, adding the lines. Actually, we can do this in one step. We're going to declare a range for our borders. So we'll say dim border range as range. Then we're going to set that border range as range, open parenthesis, A4 colon to F13, close our double quotes, close our parenthesis. Sorry, that should be equals, not as. Then later on, we're going to say, so now that we've declared that range, we can work with it similar to below, where this is saying with selection. So we're going to take this, and instead of with selection, we're going to say with our border range variable. I'm going to get rid of the direction. So line style continuous, color index 0, which will be black, tint and shades isn't actually required. Our weight, so the thickness of the line is thin. Now you can see there was 36 rows of code just for the borders. We've replaced that with this simple with and declared a variable. So I'm just going to get rid of all of that. We don't need that anymore. We can end the subroutine there. So if I just pull this down slightly, now if we press the F5 key to execute the macro, we should see the headers go bold, the dates and the grid lines. And there we go. Note we've got no grid lines around the headers there. That's just because I've set the range here slightly too low. We should have gone A3. We press F5 now, and we're going to get the grid lines there. So we've just seen how recording a macro can be helpful for finding out the correct Visual Basics syntax. However, when you're in Visual Basics, you can actually go to the View tab and the Object Browser, or simply press F2. So now we're within the Object Browser. At the top here we've got the library. We're currently on the Excel library. And then down the left hand side here we have classes. So these are all the different classes that are available. So if I was to type F for font. Now the members of the font class are displayed to me here. So if you cast your mind back to before where we used the bold member within font, you can now see actually we've got access to setting colors, we've got access to italics, underlines, strike throughs. So this is a handy little feature so that you can see what is actually available within the different classes and also what classes are available to you. And that's a whistle-stop tour of Visual Basics for Excel. So we've learned how to write macros, how to run macros, and good practice. Remember to comment your code, use clear variable names, avoid using selection or activate, use with blocks, and problem solve with debug.print and the immediate window. So next steps, have a think what you can automate and drop me any questions you have in the comments. Please remember to support the channel. It really helps if you press that like button and subscribe so that you can join us for more weekly updates. Thanks for watching.